"Ma'am, put your hands where I can see them." The command cut through the noise of Terminal B so sharply that nearby conversations stopped almost instantly. Travelers turned their heads. Rolling suitcases slowed. A few phones appeared above the crowd. Standing beside the baggage claim carousel, Angela Brooks looked up calmly from the carry-on suitcase resting at her feet. The 44-year-old black woman had landed less than 20 minutes earlier after a cross-country flight. She was tired, carrying little more than a garment bag and a small suitcase, and looking forward to finally leaving the airport. Instead, 3 uniformed officers were moving toward her with expressions that suggested they had already made up their minds. Sergeant Daniel Walker led the group. Tall, experienced, and respected inside the department, he had spent nearly 2 decades trusting his instincts. Most days that confidence helped him do his job well. Today it was leading him somewhere else. "Is there a problem, officer?" Angela asked. Her voice was steady. No panic. No anger. Walker studied her face. Earlier that morning, airport security had distributed information regarding a possible suspect connected to a financial fraud investigation. The description was vague. Female. Mid-40s. Arriving from another state. Traveling alone. To Walker, Angela appeared close enough to justify immediate action. "We need to verify your identity," he said. Around them, the terminal seemed to grow quieter. The bright airport lights reflected across polished floors. Announcements echoed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. The ordinary sounds of travel continued while something very different unfolded in the center of the terminal. Angela slowly placed a hand on her suitcase handle. "I would be happy to show identification." Walker barely nodded. "That will not be necessary yet." A few travelers exchanged uneasy glances. One man began recording with his phone. Another whispered to his wife. Nobody knew the full story. Most never do. They simply saw a black woman surrounded by police officers and immediately began forming conclusions. Angela noticed the cameras. She noticed the stares. She noticed the assumptions moving through the crowd faster than facts ever could. Yet she remained remarkably composed. Walker interpreted her calmness as caution. In reality, it came from experience. Angela had spent her entire career learning that emotional control often mattered more than emotional reaction. "Please place your hands behind your back," Walker said. A brief silence followed. The baggage carousel continued turning beside them. Suitcases circled endlessly beneath bright fluorescent lights. Angela looked at the officer for a moment. Then she complied without argument. Several people nearby gasped quietly. More phones appeared. Walker completed the procedure according to department policy. To him, this was a routine detention. To everyone watching, it looked far more dramatic. Angela stood quietly once it was finished. No protest. No raised voice. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Her expression revealed almost nothing. That calmness unsettled Walker more than resistance would have. Most innocent people demanded explanations. Most guilty people became defensive. Angela did neither. She simply observed. Across the terminal, a digital arrival board flickered with updated flight information. Beyond the glass walls, evening sunlight painted the runway in shades of gold and orange. The city she had traveled to now stood waiting beyond the airport. What nobody in the terminal knew was that Angela Brooks had not arrived as a tourist. She had not arrived for business. And she certainly had not arrived as a suspect. While passengers continued recording and officers continued their investigation, a black city vehicle was already moving through traffic toward the airport. Inside it sat people who had been searching for Angela for the past hour. People growing increasingly concerned that they could not reach her. People who had no idea she was standing in Terminal B surrounded by police officers. Angela glanced toward the terminal entrance and then back at Walker. For the first time, a faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. The officer noticed it immediately. What he could not understand was why a woman being detained looked like someone who already knew how the day would end. Sergeant Daniel Walker watched Angela Brooks carefully as another officer guided her toward a quiet waiting area near the airport security offices. The terminal remained busy around them, but the attention followed her wherever she went. Travelers continued glancing in her direction. Some whispered. Others stared openly. A few still held their phones, eager to capture a story they did not understand. Angela walked calmly through it all. Her carry-on suitcase rolled beside an officer while her garment bag rested across his arm. The scene felt strangely backward. Most people in her position demanded answers immediately. Angela simply observed. The waiting area overlooked one side of the terminal through large glass panels. Aircraft taxied slowly across the runway outside while orange sunlight reflected against the windows. An officer pulled out a chair. "You can sit here while we finish verifying information." Angela thanked him and sat down. The simple courtesy caught him off guard. Across the room, Walker reviewed the notes on his tablet again. Female. Mid-40s. Traveling alone. Arriving from Denver. The details still seemed close enough to justify concern. Yet something about the situation felt increasingly unusual. Every question they asked produced calm, direct answers. Every request was met with cooperation. No inconsistencies. No signs of deception. One younger officer approached Walker quietly. "Are we sure about this?" Walker looked up. "Why?" "I do not know. She just does not seem like someone trying to hide something." Walker folded his arms. "Appearances can be misleading." The younger officer nodded but seemed unconvinced. Meanwhile, Angela sat quietly watching planes move across the tarmac. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. The expression looking back at her remained steady. She thought about the city beyond the airport. The new office waiting for her. The responsibilities ahead. The conversation scheduled for tomorrow morning. None of those plans included spending her first afternoon in the city sitting inside an airport holding room. Yet somehow the situation felt familiar. Not the details. The assumptions. Those she recognized. A woman in an airport uniform entered carrying a tray with coffee cups. She paused when she saw Angela sitting alone. For a moment she hesitated before walking over. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked quietly. Angela smiled. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." The employee handed her a cup. "I hope everything gets sorted out soon." Angela accepted it gratefully. "So do I." The woman smiled and returned to her duties. The small act of kindness lingered long after she left. Across the room, Walker's phone vibrated. He glanced down. Missed call. City Hall. His forehead tightened slightly. A few minutes later it vibrated again. Same number. He silenced it without answering. Whatever administrative issue was happening could wait. Right now he was focused on the detention. What Walker did not know was that the same number had been attempting to reach him for nearly 40 minutes. Back outside the terminal, a dark city vehicle entered airport property. Behind it came another. Then another. Angela took a sip of coffee and looked toward the entrance doors at the far end of the terminal. Something in her eyes shifted almost imperceptibly. Not relief. Not surprise. Recognition. Somewhere beyond those doors, events were already moving toward a conclusion. Walker remained focused on reports and descriptions, convinced the truth was still ahead of him. Angela, meanwhile, seemed like someone who had already reached it. The airport waiting area grew quieter as the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. Beyond the glass walls, aircraft lights began appearing one by one across the runway while long shadows stretched across the terminal floor. Angela Brooks sat calmly with the untouched portion of her coffee resting beside her. The atmosphere around her had changed. At first, curious travelers had crowded nearby hoping to witness something dramatic. Now most had moved on. Flights departed. Families reunited. Life continued. Yet a handful of people still watched from a distance, unable to understand why the woman at the center of the situation seemed so completely untroubled. Across the room, Sergeant Daniel Walker continued reviewing reports. The longer he studied the information, the less confident he became. Small inconsistencies had started appearing. The physical description matched only in the broadest sense. The timeline seemed imperfect. Even the travel records raised questions. He looked up toward Angela again. She sat with perfect composure, gazing through the terminal windows as though she were simply waiting for a delayed flight. One of the younger officers approached carrying a folder. "We received another update." Walker opened it immediately. Several pages of information appeared inside. He scanned them quickly. Then he frowned. "This is incomplete." "That is all they sent." Walker rubbed his forehead. For the first time that day, frustration began replacing certainty. Nearby, Angela noticed the exchange without appearing to notice it. Years in law enforcement had taught her that people often revealed themselves most clearly when plans stopped unfolding as expected. A few moments later, another airport employee entered the waiting area. She carried a small garment bag that officers had taken with Angela's luggage. "Excuse me," she said. "This was separated during processing." Walker nodded distractedly. "Leave it there." The employee placed the bag on a nearby chair and left. Angela glanced toward it briefly. The garment bag looked ordinary. Dark fabric. Minimal markings. Yet hidden inside was something that would have answered many questions immediately. Angela made no effort to mention it. Across the terminal, another announcement echoed overhead. Passengers began lining up for an evening departure. The familiar sounds of rolling suitcases and distant conversations filled the background. Then Walker's phone vibrated again. Same number. City Hall. For several seconds he stared at the screen. Finally he answered. Walker speaking. The voice on the other end sounded impatient. "Sergeant, we have been trying to reach you for over an hour." Walker straightened. "I have been occupied." Clearly. Papers shuffled on the other end of the call. "We need confirmation regarding an arrival at the airport." Walker frowned. "What arrival?" "The individual scheduled to meet city officials this afternoon." Something in the caller's tone caught his attention. "Who exactly are you referring to?" Before the answer came, the connection suddenly crackled. Airport interference. Static filled the line. Walker stepped toward the hallway seeking a stronger signal. The call disconnected entirely. He stared at the phone in irritation. Back in the waiting area, Angela looked toward the terminal entrance once more. Through the distant glass, dark vehicles were beginning to arrive outside. One after another. Professional. Official. Deliberate. The younger officer noticed them first. "That is unusual." Several people turned toward the windows. Angela simply folded her hands in her lap. Her calmness remained unchanged. But this time there was something else beneath it. Recognition. Because while everyone around her was still searching for answers, Angela Brooks knew that the people stepping out of those vehicles were not coming to investigate her. They were coming to find her. The vehicles outside continued arriving one after another until nearly an entire section of the airport curb had been occupied. Through the terminal windows, passengers slowed their pace to watch. The dark sedans carried official city plates, and their appearance immediately drew attention from airport personnel. Inside the waiting area, several officers exchanged confused looks. Sergeant Daniel Walker stepped closer to the glass and narrowed his eyes. Something about the scene felt important. The problem was that he did not yet understand why. Angela Brooks remained seated. The coffee cup rested beside her. Her posture never changed. While everyone else seemed increasingly unsettled, she looked like someone waiting for a meeting that happened to be running late. One of the younger officers glanced between Angela and the vehicles. "Do you know who those people are?" he asked. Angela smiled politely. "I have a feeling we are about to find out." The answer only deepened the mystery. Walker turned back from the window. "You seem unusually calm considering the circumstances." Angela met his gaze. Panicking rarely improves a situation. The response was simple, but it lingered in the room. Outside, several individuals exited the lead vehicle. Men and women in business attire moved quickly toward the terminal entrance. One carried a folder. Another appeared to be speaking urgently into a phone. They were not behaving like investigators. They looked more like people trying to locate someone important. Meanwhile, the disconnected call from City Hall continued bothering Walker. He attempted to return it. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. The timing felt strange. The vehicles. The repeated calls. The growing uncertainty in the reports. Small details were beginning to connect in ways he did not like. Across the room, Angela noticed a familiar logo embossed on the folder one of the arriving officials carried. The sight confirmed what she already suspected. The city had finally realized she was missing. A faint amusement crossed her face before disappearing just as quickly. Nearby, the garment bag remained resting on the chair where the airport employee had left it. One corner had shifted slightly, exposing a small portion of its contents. A younger officer happened to glance toward it. Something metallic reflected beneath the overhead lights. He walked over curiously. "Sergeant." Walker looked up. "What is it?" The officer pointed toward the garment bag. "You may want to see this." Walker approached. Carefully, he opened the zipper a few inches. Inside was a formal dark blue dress uniform protected by a clear garment cover. His eyes moved downward toward the shoulder insignia. Then they stopped. The room suddenly felt quieter. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "It was in her luggage." Walker stared at the insignia again. The rank displayed there was not ordinary. In fact, it belonged to someone holding one of the highest leadership positions in a police department. He immediately looked toward Angela. She remained seated exactly where she had been all afternoon. Calm, patient, watching. Before Walker could ask another question, the waiting area door opened. Several city officials entered quickly, scanning the room with visible concern. The moment their eyes found Angela Brooks, everything changed. Relief appeared across their faces. Almost instantly, one woman placed a hand over her chest as though a weight had finally been lifted. Another hurried forward. Around the room, officers straightened. Conversations stopped. Even the sounds from the terminal beyond seemed distant now. Angela slowly rose from her chair. The city officials moved directly toward her. And for the first time since this entire situation began, Sergeant Daniel Walker felt a cold certainty forming in the pit of his stomach that he had made a mistake far larger than he ever imagined. The room remained frozen for a moment as the city officials crossed the waiting area. Their urgency disappeared the instant they reached Angela Brooks. Relief replaced concern. One of the women extended her hand immediately. "Chief Brooks, thank goodness. We have been trying to reach you for nearly 2 hours." The title seemed to echo through the room even though it had been spoken in a normal voice. Several officers exchanged confused looks. One airport employee stopped walking altogether. Sergeant Daniel Walker felt his stomach tighten. "Chief." The word alone changed everything, yet he still did not fully understand what he was hearing. Angela greeted the woman warmly. "I am sorry about the delay." The city official glanced briefly at the officer standing nearby before looking back at Angela. "The mayor's office has been waiting. Everyone assumed your flight arrived hours ago." Angela smiled gently. "It did." The answer was simple, but it carried enough meaning to make several people uncomfortable. Silence settled across the room. Walker stared at the garment bag still partially open on the chair. The insignia suddenly made sense. The repeated calls from City Hall made sense. The official vehicles made sense. Every clue he had ignored throughout the afternoon now seemed painfully obvious. Another official stepped forward holding a folder. "The press conference schedule has already been adjusted. We can still make tomorrow's announcement." Angela nodded. "Good." Walker felt the ground shifting beneath everything he thought he understood. "Excuse me," he said carefully. The group turned toward him. "Did you say Chief Brooks?" The official looked surprised. "Yes." Walker swallowed. "Police chief." "Of course." The woman frowned slightly. "The new police chief." No one spoke. Outside the glass walls, aircraft lights moved across the darkening runway. Inside, the silence felt far louder than any announcement over the airport speakers. Angela looked at Walker. There was no satisfaction in her expression. No anger. No attempt to embarrass him. That somehow made the moment more difficult. One of the younger officers lowered his eyes immediately. Another looked toward the floor. The city official seemed to finally notice the situation. Her gaze moved from Angela to the officers surrounding her, then to the waiting area itself. Understanding slowly appeared on her face. What exactly happened here? Nobody answered immediately. Walker knew the question was directed at him. Yet for the first time in many years words came slowly. The certainty that usually guided him was gone. "We were conducting an investigation," he said. The explanation sounded weaker than he intended. The official looked unconvinced. Angela quietly stepped in before the conversation could become more uncomfortable. "There was a misunderstanding." The woman blinked. "A misunderstanding?" Angela nodded. "Nothing more." Walker looked at her in disbelief. She had every opportunity to describe the situation differently. She could have detailed the assumptions, the public detention, the hours spent waiting. Instead, she had chosen the most generous explanation possible. The city officials exchanged glances. Angela's calm presence seemed to settle the room again. Then one of the officials smiled. "Well, Chief Brooks, welcome to the city." Several others laughed softly, grateful for the tension breaking. Angela smiled back. "Thank you." Nearby, Walker remained silent. He had spent the afternoon believing he was protecting the public. Now he found himself replaying every decision in his head. The initial assumption, the confidence, the refusal to question his own conclusions. Across the room, Angela picked up her coffee cup and took one final sip. Then she set it down. Through the terminal windows, the lights of the city glowed in the distance. Beyond the airport, tomorrow she would stand before cameras and officially become the leader of the department. But tonight, something far more important had happened. The people around her had revealed exactly who they were when they believed she was nobody important at all. And as Angela looked around the room, she realized that lesson might prove more valuable than any welcome ceremony waiting downtown. The atmosphere inside the waiting area changed after the revelation, but not in the way most people expected. Nobody rushed toward Angela Brooks with sudden admiration. Nobody delivered dramatic speeches. Instead, a quiet discomfort settled over the room. The officers who had spent the afternoon questioning her now seemed unsure where to look. Airport employees moved more carefully. Even the city officials lowered their voices. It was as though everyone had become aware of something larger than a simple mistake. Angela noticed it immediately. She had seen similar moments throughout her career. The realization that arrived after assumptions collided with reality. One of the city officials checked her watch. "The mayor asked us to bring you directly downtown," she said. "The welcome reception has already been delayed twice." Angela smiled. "I appreciate that." The official looked toward the officers. "We should probably leave soon." Before anyone moved, the younger officer who had questioned the detention earlier stepped forward. He looked nervous. "Chief Brooks." Angela turned toward him. "Yes." He hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say I am sorry for how this unfolded." The room became silent again. It was the first direct apology anyone had offered. Angela studied his expression. Unlike the others, he did not appear concerned about consequences. He genuinely seemed troubled by what had happened. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you probably realize." Relief appeared on the officer's face. Nearby, Walker listened quietly. The younger officer had found the courage to say what he himself had not yet managed to say. Outside the terminal windows, the sky had turned deep blue. Airport lights reflected across the glass while arriving. Passengers continued flowing through the building. Most had no idea a future police chief had spent part of her first day in the city sitting inside a holding area. Angela gathered her belongings while city staff organized the departure. The garment bag was carefully zipped closed again. Her suitcase was returned. Everything appeared normal now. Yet Walker knew nothing about the day felt normal anymore. He watched Angela thank the airport employee who had brought her coffee earlier. He watched her smile at a security worker holding a door. He watched her speak kindly to people who held no power over her future. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Respect seemed to flow naturally from her regardless of position or title. That observation bothered him almost as much as his mistake. Because if he was honest, he knew he had not shown the same consistency. One of the city officials approached Angela quietly. "The department leadership is eager to meet you." Angela laughed softly. "I imagine tomorrow will be busy." "Very busy." Their conversation drifted into plans for the coming week. New initiatives, community meetings, internal reforms. Walker found himself listening more closely than he intended. This was not merely a ceremonial appointment. Angela had been selected to lead meaningful change. The realization deepened his unease. Finally, as the group prepared to leave, Angela paused near the doorway and looked back toward the waiting area. For a brief moment, her eyes met Walker's. Neither spoke, yet something important passed between them. Not anger, not forgiveness, understanding. Walker recognized it immediately. Angela knew exactly what had happened that afternoon. She understood the assumptions, the judgments, the conclusions reached before facts were known. Yet she had chosen professionalism instead of humiliation, dignity instead of revenge. As the city officials escorted her toward the terminal exit, Walker remained standing where he was, watching, thinking. And for the first time since the detention began, he stopped asking whether Angela Brooks was who people claimed she was. The evidence was already overwhelming. The question now was whether he was the man he believed himself to be. The drive from the airport into downtown felt surprisingly quiet. City lights stretched across the windshield as Angela Brooks sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle beside a senior city official. Traffic moved steadily through the evening streets while skyscrapers reflected gold and silver against the dark sky. The events at the airport should have occupied her thoughts, yet her attention remained fixed on something else. Tomorrow morning she would officially take command of a police department facing significant challenges. Community trust had weakened. Internal morale had suffered. Expectations were high. The city official beside her glanced over. "You have been very quiet." Angela smiled. "I have a lot to think about." The woman laughed softly. "That is probably an understatement." Across town, Sergeant Daniel Walker sat alone in his patrol vehicle, outside the airport administration building. His shift had technically ended, but he had not left. The radio murmured quietly in the background while he stared through the windshield without really seeing anything. The afternoon replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Every decision, every assumption, every opportunity to slow down and ask better questions. He thought about the younger officer who had voiced concerns. He thought about the ignored calls from City Hall. Most of all, he thought about Angela's composure. She had been treated unfairly. Yet she never raised her voice, never tried to intimidate anyone, never revealed who she was to gain an advantage. Walker had encountered powerful people before. Most made sure everyone knew exactly how important they were. Angela had done the opposite. That difference stayed with him. Meanwhile, downtown preparations continued inside police headquarters. Staff members moved through hallways carrying folders and arranging meeting spaces. Conference rooms were being prepared. Schedules were finalized. Several command staff officers remained in the building despite the late hour. Everyone wanted the first day under new leadership to begin smoothly. In one office, Assistant Chief Rebecca Hayes reviewed briefing materials for the next morning. She paused when her phone rang. "Did you find her?" she asked immediately. The answer brought visible relief. "Good. I was beginning to worry." After ending the call, she looked toward the city skyline outside her office window. Angela Brooks had developed a reputation over many years. Not because she sought publicity, because results followed her wherever she worked. Departments improved. Community relationships strengthened. Accountability increased. Rebecca knew many officers were curious about the incoming chief. Few understood just how unusual she was. Back at the airport, Walker finally started his vehicle. Yet instead of driving home, he found himself heading toward downtown. He was not entirely sure why. Perhaps he needed time to think. Perhaps he wanted to understand what kind of leader Angela Brooks truly was. The city unfolded around him as he drove through illuminated streets. Restaurants buzzed with evening customers. Office workers hurried toward train stations. Life continued normally while his own perspective felt increasingly unsettled. Several miles away, Angela's vehicle turned onto a broad avenue lined with government buildings. Police headquarters appeared ahead, its exterior lit against the night sky. Angela looked through the window quietly. This building would soon become her responsibility. Hundreds of officers, thousands of decisions, countless opportunities to make a difference. The car slowed near the entrance. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, cool evening air greeted her. She looked up at the building for several seconds. Then she smiled softly. Not because of the title waiting inside. Not because of the authority. Because tomorrow would offer a chance to build something better. And after everything that happened at the airport, she suspected that opportunity might arrive sooner than anyone expected. The next morning arrived beneath a clear blue sky. Sunlight reflected across the glass exterior of police headquarters as employees streamed through the entrance carrying coffee cups, folders, and briefcases. The building felt different than usual. Conversations were more energetic. People stood a little straighter. The arrival of a new police chief always brought attention, but this appointment carried something more. Expectations, hope, curiosity. Inside the executive conference room on the top floor, command staff members gathered around a long polished table. Assistant Chief Rebecca Hayes reviewed the agenda, while department leaders quietly exchanged observations. Most had studied Angela Brooks's career for weeks. Many had heard stories about her leadership. Very few had met her in person. Meanwhile, across town, Angela sat alone for a few moments inside her hotel suite overlooking the city skyline. A neatly pressed dress uniform hung nearby. Morning light filled the room. On a small table rested briefing materials she had reviewed late into the night. Yet her attention remained on a different memory. Terminal B. The waiting area. The officers. The assumptions. She thought about Sergeant Daniel Walker. Not with anger. With curiosity. During her years in law enforcement, she had learned that mistakes often revealed organizational culture more clearly than success ever could. The question was never whether mistakes happened. The question was how people responded afterward. Angela picked up a photograph resting inside a notebook. The image showed her standing beside her father many years earlier. He had spent 3 decades serving as a patrol officer. One of his favorite sayings returned to her now. The badge does not tell people who you are. It reveals who you already were. She smiled softly before placing the photograph away. 45 minutes later, she entered police headquarters. The lobby immediately became quiet. Officers, civilian employees, and administrative staff turned toward her as she crossed the marble floor. Angela greeted people naturally as she passed. A receptionist smiled. Angela smiled back. A maintenance worker holding a toolbox stepped aside politely. Angela thanked him. The small interactions were noticed. More than she realized. Upstairs, the command staff meeting began precisely on schedule. Angela listened carefully as department leaders outlined current priorities. Crime statistics, community programs, staffing concerns, training initiatives. Each presentation revealed strengths as well as challenges. Angela took notes but spoke very little. She preferred understanding before judging. Near the end of the meeting, Assistant Chief Hayes hesitated before introducing the final item. There is one situation from yesterday we should probably discuss. The room became noticeably quieter. Several leaders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Angela already knew where the conversation was heading. Hayes continued carefully. The airport incident has been brought to our attention. Nobody moved. We are conducting an internal review regarding the detention. Angela folded her hands calmly. Good. The simple answer surprised several people. Hayes blinked. Good. Angela nodded. If we expect accountability from the public, we should expect it from ourselves. The room remained silent. Then she added, but accountability and humiliation are not the same thing. Several heads slowly lifted. Angela's words carried no anger, no demand for punishment, only clarity. We will review facts, she said. We will identify lessons. And then we will improve. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Relief appeared across several faces. Not because consequences had disappeared. Because fairness had entered the discussion. Across town, Walker sat inside his patrol vehicle reading an email from headquarters. A mandatory leadership briefing had been scheduled for later that afternoon. The sender listed attendees. His eyes stopped when he reached the final name. Chief Angela Brooks. Walker stared at the screen for several seconds. The meeting was real now. The airport was over. Excuses were over. And within a few hours, he would be standing face to face with the woman whose first day in the city had become the most important lesson of his entire career. The afternoon briefing was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but Sergeant Daniel Walker arrived nearly 20 minutes early. He sat alone in a conference room on the 4th floor of police headquarters, staring through a wall of windows overlooking downtown. The city stretched in every direction beneath a bright autumn sky. Traffic moved through the streets below. Pedestrians crossed intersections. Ordinary life continued. Yet inside the room, Walker felt a level of nervousness he had not experienced in years. He had testified in courtrooms, responded to emergencies, led difficult investigations. None of those situations felt quite like this. One by one, other supervisors entered the room. Some greeted him. Others took seats quietly. Everyone knew about the airport incident by now. News traveled quickly inside law enforcement organizations. Although no official announcement had been made, details had already spread throughout the building. Some officers were curious. Others were embarrassed. Most were waiting to see how Angela Brooks would handle it. Walker understood why. The answer would reveal a great deal about the department's new leader. A few minutes later, Assistant Chief Rebecca Hayes entered carrying several folders. Conversations immediately quieted. "Chief Brooks will be joining us shortly," she said. "Before she arrives, I want to make one thing clear." Her voice remained professional but firm. "This meeting is about leadership, not blame." Several people exchanged glances. Hayes continued, "If anyone expects a public punishment session, you are going to be disappointed." Walker looked down briefly. The statement surprised him. He had expected exactly the opposite. Moments later, the conference room door opened again. Angela Brooks stepped inside. Every person in the room stood automatically, not because of fear, because respect often arrived before words. Angela thanked them and took a seat near the center of the table rather than at the head. The choice immediately caught several people's attention. Most chiefs preferred symbolic displays of authority. Angela seemed uninterested in them. After brief introductions, the meeting began. Department priorities were reviewed. Community engagement initiatives were discussed. Recruitment challenges were analyzed. Angela listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. The more she spoke, the more people seemed to relax. Her leadership style felt direct but approachable, strong without being intimidating. Then eventually the conversation reached the subject everyone knew was coming: the airport. Silence settled across the room. Angela folded her hands calmly. "I know many of you have questions," she said. No one interrupted. "Yes, the detention occurred. Yes, mistakes were made." Her voice remained steady. "And yes, we will learn from them." Walker felt every word land heavily. Yet there was no anger behind them. No desire to embarrass anyone. Angela looked around the room. "The lesson is not about one officer." Several heads lifted. "The lesson is about assumptions." The room became very still. Angela continued, "When we stop asking questions because we think we already know the answer, mistakes become inevitable." Nobody argued. Nobody could. The truth was too obvious. Angela glanced toward Walker briefly. Not long enough to single him out. Just long enough to acknowledge reality. Then she continued, addressing the entire room. "Every person we encounter deserves to be treated with dignity. Not because they hold a title. Not because they might become important later. Because dignity should never depend on either of those things." Several supervisors slowly nodded. The words carried more weight coming from someone who had experienced the opposite only 24 hours earlier. Near the end of the meeting, Angela stood and gathered her notes. "Leadership is not about being perfect," she said. "It is about being willing to grow after imperfection reveals itself." As officers began leaving the conference room, Walker remained seated. He watched Angela speaking with department leaders near the doorway. For the first time since the airport, he realized something important. The most remarkable part of the story was not that she had become police chief. It was that she had every reason to seek revenge and absolutely no interest in doing so. After the meeting ended, most of the supervisors returned to their assignments carrying notebooks and fresh responsibilities. The energy inside headquarters felt different now. Conversations that once focused on rumors had shifted toward plans. Officers discussed community programs. Administrators reviewed upcoming initiatives. For the first time in months, many employees felt cautiously optimistic about the future. Yet Sergeant Daniel Walker remained standing alone near the conference room windows long after everyone else had left. Below him, the city moved through another ordinary afternoon. Cars flowed through intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. Everything looked normal. His thoughts were anything but. The image of Angela Brooks standing calmly in Terminal B continued returning to him. The more he reflected on it, the less comfortable he became. Not because she had become police chief, Because she had demonstrated a level of self-control and professionalism he was not sure he would have matched under similar circumstances. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He turned and saw Assistant Chief Rebecca Hayes standing in the doorway. "You have a minute?" she asked. Walker nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a moment neither spoke. Then Hayes crossed her arms. "You are taking this hard." Walker gave a humorless laugh. "Should I not be?" Hayes considered the question carefully. "You should learn from it." She paused. "But there is a difference between accountability and self-destruction." Walker looked back toward the skyline. "I made assumptions." "Yes." "I ignored warning signs." "Yes." "I treated someone unfairly." Hayes nodded. "Also yes." Walker sighed. Hearing the truth spoken aloud somehow made it easier to accept. Hayes moved closer to the window. "Do you know why the mayor wanted Angela Brooks for this position?" Walker shook his head. "Because she has a reputation for changing culture without destroying people." The statement lingered in the room. Hayes continued. "Other leaders focus on punishment. Angela focuses on growth." Walker looked toward her. "You sound like you know her." "We worked together years ago." A small smile appeared on Hayes's face. "She expects excellence. She does not tolerate dishonesty. But she also believes most people can become better if they are willing to be honest about their mistakes." The words settled heavily in Walker's mind. Across the building, Angela sat in her new office reviewing personnel files. The room still felt unfamiliar. Boxes remained unopened. Family photographs had not yet been arranged. Yet one thing already felt clear. The department contained good people. Some needed guidance. Some needed accountability. Most needed both. Her attention eventually landed on a file resting near the top of the stack. Sergeant Daniel Walker. Years of service. Strong performance evaluations. Multiple commendations. Community outreach work. Positive leadership reviews. Angela studied the record quietly. The airport incident did not fit neatly with the officer described in front of her. That discrepancy interested her. People were rarely defined by their best moment or their worst one. Leadership required understanding the difference. A few minutes later, there was a knock at her office door. "Come in." Rebecca Hayes entered. "Everything all right?" Angela asked. Hayes smiled. "I just had a conversation with Walker." Angela leaned back slightly. "And he is carrying the weight of yesterday." Angela looked toward the city outside her window. "That is not entirely a bad thing." Hayes nodded. "I thought you would say that." For several moments both women watched the afternoon sunlight reflect across neighboring buildings. Then Angela spoke quietly. "A mistake becomes dangerous only when someone refuses to learn from it." Hayes smiled. "That sounds like something your father would have said." Angela laughed softly. "It probably is." As evening approached and shadows stretched across the city once again, Walker sat alone at his desk reviewing reports. Yet his attention kept returning to a single thought. Tomorrow he would have an opportunity to speak directly with Angela Brooks. Not as the woman from the airport. Not as a symbol of his mistake. But as the leader of the department. And for the first time since this entire story began, he knew exactly what he needed to say. The following morning arrived with a steady rain falling across the city. Water traced narrow paths down the windows of police headquarters, while gray clouds softened the skyline beyond. Inside the building, officers moved through hallways carrying reports and coffee cups, preparing for another day of work. Yet for Sergeant Daniel Walker, the day felt different from every other shift he had worked during the past 20 years. He had made a decision. No more waiting. No more rehearsing explanations. No more hoping the discomfort would fade on its own. He intended to speak directly with Angela Brooks. Shortly after 9 o'clock, Walker stood outside the chief's office. The hallway felt unusually quiet. Through a nearby window, rain tapped gently against the glass. He adjusted his uniform and took a slow breath. Then he knocked. "Come in." Angela's voice carried the same calm confidence he remembered from the airport. Walker opened the door. Angela sat behind a desk covered with reports, community proposals, and departmental briefings. Several unopened boxes still lined one wall. Despite the responsibilities surrounding her, she looked remarkably relaxed. "Sergeant Walker," she said, "please have a seat." Walker entered and closed the door behind him. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable to him but not to Angela. She simply waited. Finally Walker looked directly at her. "I owe you an apology." Angela folded her hands. "All right." The simple response surprised him. There was no dramatic tension. No visible resentment. Just attention. Walker continued. "What happened at the airport should not have happened." He paused. "I made assumptions. I ignored information that should have caused me to slow down. And I treated you unfairly." Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Angela listened without interrupting. Walker looked down briefly before continuing. "I spent a lot of time thinking about it over the last 2 days." His voice became quieter. "The truth is that if I had approached the situation differently from the beginning, none of it would have happened." Angela nodded slowly. "That is probably true." Walker almost smiled at the understatement. Then Angela leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something." "Yes, Chief. What have you learned?" The question caught him off guard. He expected criticism, perhaps even consequences. Instead she was asking about growth. Walker considered the answer carefully. "I learned that confidence can become dangerous when it turns into certainty." Angela nodded once. "Good." Walker continued. "I learned that treating people with dignity cannot depend on whether we think they are important." "Also good." The faintest smile touched Angela's face. Encouraged, Walker added, "And I learned that assumptions move faster than facts." This time Angela actually smiled. That lesson takes some people an entire career. The tension in the room began to ease. Not because the mistake had disappeared. Because it was finally being examined honestly. Angela stood and walked toward the rain-covered window. The city beyond looked blurred beneath the weather. "My father used to tell me something," she said quietly. "Character is revealed when nobody important is watching." Walker listened. Angela turned toward him. "At the airport, many people believed I was nobody important." The statement hung in the air. Not angry. Not accusatory. Simply true. Walker nodded slowly. "I know." Angela studied him for a moment. Then she spoke again. "The good news is that character can also be strengthened when someone chooses to learn." For the first time since Terminal B, Walker felt a measure of relief. Not because he had been excused. Because he had been given an opportunity to become better. Outside, the rain continued falling steadily across the city. Inside the office, the conversation shifted toward community outreach programs and future department goals. The airport incident was no longer the center of the discussion. Growth was. And as Walker left the office later that morning, he realized Angela Brooks had done something far more difficult than punishing a mistake. She had transformed it into a lesson that would follow him for the rest of his career. Over the following weeks, the changes inside the department became increasingly visible. They were not dramatic changes announced through press conferences or celebrated with headlines. They were smaller, quieter, the kind of changes that revealed themselves through daily behavior. Officers spent more time listening during community meetings. Supervisors asked more questions before reaching conclusions. Training sessions focused not only on procedures but also on judgment. Angela Brooks believed culture was built one decision at a time, and slowly the department began reflecting that philosophy. On a bright Thursday afternoon, sunlight poured through the windows of the Community Outreach Center where Angela was attending a neighborhood forum. Residents filled rows of folding chairs while officers stood nearby answering questions. The atmosphere felt respectful, honest. People spoke openly about concerns and expectations. Angela listened carefully to every comment. Near the back of the room, Sergeant Daniel Walker observed the discussion. Weeks earlier, he would have approached the event differently. He would have focused on maintaining order. Now he focused on understanding. The distinction seemed small, yet it changed everything. During a break, an elderly woman approached Angela carrying a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "Chief Brooks," she said warmly, "I wanted to thank you." Angela smiled. "For what?" The woman laughed softly. "For making people feel heard." Angela accepted the compliment graciously. That credit belongs to everyone willing to participate. Nearby, Walker watched the exchange. Once again he noticed the same pattern. Angela never centered herself. She redirected praise, shared credit, elevated others. The behavior appeared natural rather than calculated. Later that afternoon, after the forum concluded, officers helped stack chairs while residents slowly departed. Angela remained behind speaking with volunteers. The room gradually emptied until only a handful of people remained. Walker approached carefully. "Chief." Angela looked up. "How did the event feel to you?" The question surprised him. She genuinely wanted his opinion. Walker glanced around the room. "Different than similar meetings I have attended before." "Different how?" He considered the answer. People seemed comfortable speaking honestly. Angela nodded. "Trust grows when people believe they will be heard." Walker smiled slightly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple." Angela laughed softly. "Simple does not mean easy." They walked toward the exit together. Outside, children played basketball on a nearby court, while families gathered beneath the late afternoon sun. The neighborhood felt alive, connected. Angela paused to watch for a moment. "This is why the work matters," she said quietly. Walker followed her gaze. For the first time he fully understood what she meant. The job was not merely about enforcing rules. It was about protecting opportunities for ordinary moments like these. Safe neighborhoods, strong communities, trust between strangers. As they stood there, Angela turned toward him. "You know something, Sergeant?" "What is that?" "Most people think leadership is about authority." Walker nodded. "I used to think that too." Angela smiled. "Authority can make people obey. Character makes people follow." The words settled deeply. In that moment, Walker realized the airport had become something entirely different than a personal embarrassment. It had become the beginning of a lesson, one that had changed how he viewed his profession, his assumptions, and himself. The sun slowly lowered across the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the street. Around them, conversations continued. Children laughed. Cars passed by. Ordinary life unfolded exactly as it should. And as Angela Brooks walked back toward her vehicle, she knew the department was moving in the right direction. Not because mistakes had never happened, but because people had chosen to learn from them. Several months later, the story of Angela Brooks's arrival at the airport had quietly faded from public conversation. New challenges had taken its place. New initiatives filled the department's calendar. New successes and setbacks occupied daily attention. Yet some lessons never truly disappeared. They settled into the culture and remained there, shaping decisions long after the original moment was gone. On a cool autumn evening, the city gathered for a community appreciation event held in a renovated civic center overlooking the river. Families filled the outdoor plaza. Food vendors lined the walkways. Children ran beneath strings of warm lights suspended between trees. Police officers mingled comfortably with residents. Conversations felt easy, natural. The atmosphere reflected something that had been difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. Trust had begun returning. Angela Brooks moved through the crowd without ceremony. She stopped to greet local business owners. She spoke with volunteers. She listened more than she talked. Many people recognized her, but she carried herself exactly as she had on the day she arrived in the city. No entourage, no performance, just presence. Nearby, Sergeant Daniel Walker stood speaking with several community members. The change in him was visible to anyone who knew him well. He listened longer, asked better questions, reached conclusions more slowly. The lesson from the airport had not made him weaker. It had made him wiser. As evening settled across the riverfront, city officials invited Angela to say a few words. A small stage had been arranged beneath glowing lights. The crowd gathered quietly. Angela stepped forward and looked out at hundreds of faces. Residents, officers, families, children, colleagues. For a moment she simply smiled. "People often ask what makes a community strong," she began. The plaza grew still. "Some think it is money. Some think it is laws. Some think it is power." She paused briefly. "I think it is trust." Heads nodded throughout the crowd. Trust is built when people choose dignity over assumptions, listening over certainty, character over appearances. The words carried softly through the evening air. Angela did not mention the airport. She did not need to. The lesson had become larger than the event itself. After the speech ended, applause echoed across the plaza. Not loud, not dramatic, genuine. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Angela stepped away from the stage and walked toward the river. Reflections of city lights shimmered across the water. The air felt cool and peaceful. A few moments later, Walker approached. "That was a good speech." Angela laughed softly. "It was a short speech. Those are usually the best kind." They stood quietly watching the water. Neither felt a need to fill the silence. Finally, Walker spoke. "You know, I still think about that day sometimes." Angela looked toward the river. "So do I." Walker nodded. "Not because of what happened." He hesitated. "Because of how you handled it." Angela smiled. "Life gives all of us chances to decide who we want to be." The river moved steadily beneath the lights. Cars crossed a distant bridge. Somewhere behind them, laughter drifted from the festival grounds. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. The very things both of them had dedicated their careers to protecting. After a while, Angela turned and began walking back toward the crowd. Walker remained where he was for a few seconds longer. Then he followed. The woman who arrived in the city under suspicion had become the leader who helped transform it. And the officer who once judged too quickly had learned that true authority does not come from a badge, a title, or a uniform. It comes from the courage to see people clearly. Under the glow of the city lights, Angela Brooks disappeared into the crowd, not as the most powerful person there, but as the person who reminded everyone what decency looked like. And in the end, that mattered far more.